Well, good evening. I'm going to call the meeting to order. My name is Kathy Benz. I'm the president of CONA. And welcome to this February 8th, 2016 meeting of the Sarasota County Council of Neighborhood Associations. I want to let you know that our meetings now are available thanks to Pete Tyson, who is recording them for us each month. And he gives them to me, and I post them on the meeting page of the CONA website, which is www.conasarasota.org. We also post resource materials related to the topic of each meeting on our links to resources page. After I post the video of the meeting, you can go there and find associated materials and links that relate to the topic of the meeting. Tonight I want to recognize in our audience Jane Kirshner-Turshilo, who is the past president of the the Historical Society of Sarasota County. And I want to make note of the fact that Harriet Burns Steve had intended to attend this meeting, and unfortunately she had unexpected visitors show up, so she's wound up, she's going to watch the video of the meeting. On Saturday, March 6th, CCNA, our sister organization, which is a coalition of city neighborhood associations that meets the first Saturday of each month at Waldemere Fire Station, will have Pamela Natalini, who is the city auditor and clerk, and Robert Fournier, who is the city attorney, discuss their offices, their charter officials for the city, and their duties. Are there any announcements from the floor from member organizations? Are there any announcements for organizations in the community that they'd like to have announced? Okay. The next business is the election of a new director. At the last meeting, Pat Rounds, who's sitting over here, was nominated to become a director of CONA. And the members of CONA that are here tonight have to perform the election. I would like to entertain a motion for her election. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, congratulations. The next CONA meeting will be Monday, March 14, and its topic is development compatibility issues in established neighborhoods. You know, we're all encouraging infill development rather than sprawl. However, it's really important that infill development be compatible with the neighborhoods that they're being built in. I have a couple of organizations that will be presenting case histories, one of which has been extremely successful and another which is in progress at the moment. Don't miss our meeting. If you're not receiving my announcements for our meetings, I encourage you to make sure that you've given your email address on the sign-in sheet, and I'll add you to the circulation. There's also invoices over there to join CONA. We not only represent neighborhood associations, we also have members who are individuals that join. So if your neighborhood association doesn't care to join CONA, or if there's no neighborhood association formed in your area and you're a concerned citizen and want to get involved, join CONA. Tonight I'm want to provide the regrets to Lori, by the way, from Harriet, Bern, Steve, who wanted to attend, and Bill Murtaugh, who is was the first keeper of the National Trust. Wanted to be here too, but he had a prior engagement and couldn't be. Other people, John McCarthy, who was a previous director of the Division of Historical Resources with the county, and Dave Baber, who also is here tonight. So I'd like to get started and introduce our topic is historic preservation adds value to your home and the entire community. And I'd like to introduce Lori Muldowney. Now, I've known Lori for years. 1984 is when we first got to know one another, and she's been one of the most important professionals in historic preservation that I've found in Sarasota County. The microphone that's over there is already on.
Okay, great.
And Lori's going to sit in order to go through the slides. We'll have questions and answers afterward, and I'll come around to you if you'll raise your hand. We do need, since we videotape the program, we do need for you to wait until I get a microphone to you before you express your question, please. Lori?
Great. Well, thank you very much. Excuse me for sitting. I'm looking at some notes on the computer, and this was the only way we could figure things out logistically. But it's great to be here. I see so many familiar faces. I certainly appreciate you being out here to learn more about the economic benefits of historic preservation. As Kathy said, there'll be some times for question and answers at the end of my presentation, and the answers, if I don't know the answers to your questions, I'll be happy to look them up and get back to you with that information. So I had a question already, and that was about what is the building that we've got photographed here. Anybody recognize this structure?
Yeah. Wait a minute, I want to make one announcement. Our videographer wants you all to take out your cell phones and to turn them off, please. It will interfere with the audio. Thank you.
So what I want to do tonight is just provide a brief overview of the National Register of Historic Places and the City of Sarasota's local Register of Historic Places. In my many years of practicing in Sarasota County, I found that there's an awful lot of confusion about both the benefits and the responsibilities with each of those. So I want to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to talk about the economic benefits of historic preservation, those which, again, are available on the national and the local levels. And so we will begin. Let's see if this is going to work as I think it will. So first off, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Florida's rich history, because once again, with my many years of working in historic preservation in the state of Florida, probably one of the more common questions is, well, what is historic about Florida? And I appreciate the fact that there are many people that come to Sarasota have come from other places and lived in communities like Salem, Massachusetts, and Boston, and Charleston, and that they have very rich, long histories. But I'd like to tell you that Florida does as well. The photographs here depict Florida's historic Capitol building. I'm also going to promote the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. I'm a member of their board of directors. The trust is located in Tallahassee, and one of their first projects was saving our historic Capitol building. Have any of you visited the Historic Capitol in Tallahassee? It's a great resource for us. It was actually slated for demolition, and in the 1970s, the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation was in its infancy, and they were formed to help preserve the Florida Capitol. The photograph in the center there shows a wonderful glass window that had been covered up by paint and was restored as part of the project. The wonderful historic capitol is now available as a museum, free for the people of the state of Florida to enjoy, and it lives very comfortably next to the new office building, which accommodates our needs. Can't talk about Florida history without talking about St. Augustine. It is actually the oldest city in the country. It was established in 1855. If you haven't visited St. Augustine, I would encourage you to do so. What we're looking at the bottom there is the plan of St. Augustine. As I said, that's from 1865, I'm sorry, and as well as some elements. Excuse me, 1565, yeah. I'm sorry. Thanks. So, but we do have one of the oldest cities in the country. For those of you that have visited Pensacola, it was founded in 1559. Beautiful city on the panhandle of Florida, wonderfully rich architecture there as well. Traveling way south, I think most of you maybe have visited Key West. It's a very, very special place. And it was at one time one of the largest cities in the state of Florida in its early days. Ybor City, a little bit closer by, also has a very rich history, wonderful history associated with early Cuban settlers there and the cigar industry. Here we are in Miami. Last year, the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation had their annual conference there. On the left, the Freedom Tower, Miami's Art Deco district, as well as Vizcaya, to name a few. These are some photographs of Palm Beach, also, of course, on the east coast of Florida. A lot of architecture there by a very significant Florida architect, Addison Meisner, who worked up and down the east coast of Florida. So, why should we care about historic preservation? What I have photographed there is a picture of the Crowley family store in Old Myakka. I don't know how many of you have visited the little community of Old Myakka in eastern Sarasota County. Very, very unique. Still maintains its rural identity. So when we think about historic places, they do provide an authentic sense of place. And it's funny to me because as much as I've read about preservation over the years and studied historic preservation over the years, it still is really an emotional reaction to a place, I find, when I walk into an historic building. It's the technology, it's the history of the place, it's understanding or trying to understand the lives that were lived there. And Myakka certainly represents that in many ways. Thankfully, historic preservation is more than just an aesthetic. It also strengthens and improves our property values, and I'm going to talk more about that later. Fosters civic pride and strengthens the economy. And when it's gone, it's gone. So this very dramatic photograph is of the Bellevuebiltmore, which was located in Bellevue, Florida, which is on the west coast north of Clearwater, slightly north of Clearwater. This was a turn-of-the-century hotel that had the distinction of hosting many, many presidents over the years of its existence. The Florida Trust for Historic Preservation fought a noble fight to try to preserve this building from development pressures. However, in 2015, it was demolished. We have those same kind of stories here. Maybe some of you remember the John Ringling Towers. The Sarasota Alliance for Historic Preservation was founded to help preserve that structure. Veronica Morgan was very instrumental in those efforts. Thank you, Veronica. So many communities have lost very important buildings. And again, sort of an early lesson that you learn as a preservationist is that demolition is pretty final. And sometimes if there are ways to even mothball a significant building for a period of time, to wait for the economy to change or to wait for emerging technologies to evolve, and just sort of leave it as it is, if time allows, that can be a preservation strategy in itself. So I just wanted to identify some of the community tools for historic preservation, and I'm glad to say that we actually have all of these in place, both in the city of Sarasota and in Sarasota County. We have buildings that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places. We have comprehensive plans that include historic preservation chapters. In fact, Sarasota County is updating their comprehensive plan right now, and I would encourage you to get involved in that process. Both the City of Sarasota and Sarasota County have local historic preservation ordinances, so you can locally historically designate a structure. Both are certified local government programs. That's a program put together by the state of Florida that ensures that there are certain minimum qualifications of historic preservation board members, and that the board acts, uses the appropriate design guidelines and publishes their meeting minutes and things of that nature. And then I'm going to talk in more detail about Sarasota County's ad valorem tax exemption ordinance, which is a financial incentive on the local level, which is available to property owners that have locally designated structures. So, again, a question that I get an awful lot is what makes a building historic? And I didn't even answer the most common question, which is how old does a building have to be deemed historic? Well, I was presenting some information at the Southgate Community Center, and I came to the realization that I myself was now old enough to be considered historic. And that was a few years ago. But in general, a structure needs to be 50 years old or older to be historically designated. There are exceptions to that rule, and we have exceptions here quite a lot. Because we have such a significant modern movement, I think probably most of you have read or heard about the Sarasota School of Architecture. Many buildings from that movement have been nominated at less than 50 years of age. Very notably would be the Sanderling Cabanas on the south side of Siesta Key. They were nominated in the early 90s at and they were somewhere around 42, 43 years of age. And actually the first photograph I showed, the Revere Quality House, was nominated when it was only about 40 years old. So that's the exception. Generally speaking, to be eligible for listing in the national or local registers, you need to be significant in one or more of several areas. Association with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad pattern of our history. Very commonly in Sarasota, people will nominate buildings that are associated with the Florida land boom. You know, these Mediterranean revival style buildings that were so common to that era are often nominated for that reason. We also have wood frame structures from earlier, the settlement era as we call it. Those would be, an example of a structure like that would be the Luke Wood House that the Historical Society has on 12th Street, would be associated with Sarasota's early settlement movement and could be nominated for that alone. Sometimes buildings are nominated if they're associated with events that have made a associated because of their association with the lives of persons significant in our past. And when the National Register was first put together, this was a pretty common criteria. There was a lot more emphasis on national figures And, you know, as you travel the country, I'm sure you're often finding houses of famous war heroes. They seem to always be associated with wars and mail. But this is a pretty common criteria. As we've grown more sophisticated in thinking about this criteria, folks from the National Register have identified that if you're going to nominate a building for its association with a significant person, that person needs to have lived in that house while they were doing their significant work. So that old theory of George Washington slept here, we're going to nominate this building to the National Register, actually is not applicable. If George Washington was there for a period of time when he was doing important work that he was well known for, then yes. But otherwise, probably not. And then the third criteria is if a building embodies distinctive characteristics of a certain style, period, method of construction. Oftentimes, the Sarasota School of Architecture buildings are nominated under this criterion. Sometimes when you're walking in a neighborhood, you know, you can see a building and say, boy, that's just a textbook colonial revival style home, or classical revival, or Tudor, we have a few of those. And so this would be the criteria that you could use for either the national or local registers when you have a home like that. And then as you'd expect, buildings can be nominated for more than one criteria, and we see that often as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the National Register of Historic Places. There is an awful lot of misinformation about what it means and why it was created. This year we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the National Historic Preservation Act. And the National Register of Historic Places was created as part of that act. It really had a pretty narrow definition. When it was created, it has been broadened over time. As I said, when it was first written, the emphasis was on figures with national interest. Now the National Register recognizes significance on the national, state, and local levels. And so that's a good thing because it enriches our understanding of our local communities. It was really put in place to protect significant buildings from other federal undertakings. And if you think back to the 1960s, what I think about is the amazing growth that was going on in our country. It was post-World War II, it was the building boom, and we were seeing great American cities undermined by public works projects. Road widening is the example that usually